over at the Atlantic Council earlier this week, and I noticed that they have like adopted, in Korea at all the conferences, they have like walk-up music at the hotels.
Oh.
And Atlantic Council is doing that now, and I thought, where am I? We don't have any walk-up music.
Well, you should try one next time.
Yeah. See, did you need some water or coffee? Or that's the one thing that we don't have. Maybe just some water for everybody.
Yeah, just the water, please. Yeah, thank you.
Just give that to Engineer.
We got 2 more on the way.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to wait to start until. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for our event on Unpacking South Korea's 2025 presidential election. I'm Scott Snyder, President and CEO of the Korea Economic Institute. And before we really dive in, first of all, I want to say thank you to the in-person people. We also have a lot of people signed on, an unusually large amount for us virtually. So we know that this event is getting some attention. I do want to mention one preview of coming attractions, and that is that we are releasing a report on a special survey that we did back in December on American attitudes toward trade and investment. And this was conducted before President Trump took office, but it provides data on aspects of American views toward inward investment in the United States, as well as American attitudes on tariffs, and I think it'll be useful in understanding how particular segments of the American public are viewing that issue. So stay tuned to our website and also our YouTube channel for release of some of those materials. So today we're focused on the South Korean election. Our goal in holding this program is really to bring everybody up to speed on where things stand in preparation for the formal election campaign. And just to catch everybody up, the date for the elections was set following the Constitutional Court's unanimous decision to uphold the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol following the December 3rd martial law declaration. South Korea's constitution requires that an election be held within 60 days of that April 4th ruling. And since that moment, the ruling People's Power Party and the opposition Democratic Party have conducted primaries to conduct their respective standard bearers with a number of twists and turns along the way. In fact, I had projected that we might actually have final candidates by now. This is D28, and we're about halfway through the 30-day period, but it seems things are not completely settled. May 7th is the deadline for the National Election Commission to order printed materials for the election, and May 11th is the deadline for candidate registration. So this is the beginning of the final phase of the campaign, and we're going to be holding some other events related to the election as well before we get to June 3rd. So to help us to understand the candidate histories and backgrounds, issues and influences likely to shape the campaign, and the characteristics of the Korean electorate and the current vibe surrounding the campaign, we have three veteran journalists. Kim Yoo-jin, to my left, is the Washington, D.C. correspondent for Gyeongyang Shinmun. Very grateful to have you here. On my far left is Kim Eun-jung, the Washington, D.C. correspondent for the Chosun Ilbo. Thank you for coming. And then on the TV screen is Michelle Ye-hee Lee, the Seoul-based correspondent for the Washington Post. And we selected each of these three panelists because for Korean journalists, they have survived past reporting in Seoul, a very tough media environment, and they have done well enough that they're here as reporters in Washington. And so that means they're on a very good professional track. Of course, Michelle is in her 5th year of covering Northeast Asia from Seoul for the Washington Post, and also has special experience with the Washington Post interpreting President Trump's messaging during the first Trump administration. And so all three of these individuals are very up to speed and plugged in, and I think should help us to essentially provide a framework for understanding where we are and where we might be going in the context of the run-up to the campaign. And so the first question that I want to ask, and I'll start with Yoo-jin, is to provide us a little bit of background and context related to Lee Jae-myung, the Democratic Party candidate who is leading in the polls. Tell us a little bit about his background and experience, his challenges, the factors that are helping him to do well right at this moment, and also something about some of the legal challenges that he faces.
Yeah, so Lee Jae-myung secured his candidacy handily pretty early on. He gained 90% support from the Democratic Party, so this shows that he has a strong grip of his party. And he comes from background in local governance because he was a mayor of Seongnam and then governor of Gyeonggi province. And one thing to note is that he faced off Yoon Suk-yeol in the last election in 2022, and the margin of victory was only 0.72%. And now, after 3 years, Lee Jae-myung is testing his chances again, sort of gaining this support for anti-Yoon base. And his challenge is to really garner support from independent and centrist voters, because just like in the U.S., in Korea, it's like pretty much 35% of conservatives, 35% of liberals, and what really decides the outcome is people in the middle. And his strategy has been trying to appeal to those group of voters. So he recruited some prominent conservative figures into his campaign operations, and he has tailored messages to appeal to those voters, sort of like stressing on economic recovery over redistribution, which he used to really advocate for as a mayor in Gyeonggi province. And Scott, you mentioned about legal risks and challenges, and this is really constantly evolving, and it's just like changes overnight whenever I wake up in the morning. But last week, the Supreme Court had a ruling that essentially overturned the lower court's acquittal on 2 election law violation charges. So now he has to go on a trial again. And Democratic Party has been really angry about this. They are saying this is a judicial coup, and they have actually, I think just yesterday, they demanded that the court has to announce that they will not hold a first trial before the election. And we are very familiar with what that has been like last election in the U.S. So they're trying to delay the trial so as to not that it affects his presidential campaign. And the appeals court decision will unlikely come out before the election. So Lee Jae-myung is not forbidden to run for the presidential race, but I think it still compounds a lot of political fate around him, and there are still debates whether if he ever gets elected and if he is found guilty, whether he would enjoy the immunity or not. So it's very uncertain at the moment.
Unjung, do you have anything to add?
Yes, just a quick comment. So before coming to Washington, I had a chance to follow Lee Jae-myung's candidacy in the 2022 election. It was a slight loss, less than 1 point margin. But back then, considering it's like a legal risk, he has 4 or 5 trials going on a week. Many people, even inside the Democratic Party, thought it might be not easy for him to get like another chance, but somehow he managed that well. He survived. He has a lot of up and downs, not only during his political career, but his entire personal journey. So something martial law declaration, something I have never expected popped up, and here he has a chance. I think it's fair to say that he's the closest man to the presidency. If you look at the polls, it's about almost like 45 to 50%. I think one main challenge is still he also has a high unfavorability, especially his what he has done during his political career is some extreme actions and words. It's kind of making concerns among voters in the middle and the conservatives. So I think for the next 30 days, it will be key for him to overcome that kind of concern in South Korea.
Okay. And Michelle, of course, you interviewed Lee Jae-myung very recently, a few months ago, I think, before the campaign really got off the ground, but clearly he was probably preparing. What were your impressions of what he said during the interview and how he has positioned himself related to this presidential run?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me from all the way here in Korea. I'm zooming in, but yeah, during the interview, it was before any of the impeachment ruling had come down, so he was very careful not to mention himself as a presidential candidate. But it was clear he was already positioning himself as such. His move toward the center actually began right around the time that I had interviewed him, so it was clear he was, trying to sort of temper his previous rhetoric, especially around the U.S. ROK alliance and around Japan and U.S. ROK-Japan cooperation, and he wanted to sort of take a more moderate stance because that's clearly the block of voters that he needs to appeal to. And my impressions of him during the interview was that he is clearly a very experienced politician. He was very smooth, didn't need any talking points. He just kind of came in and we riffed out sort of back and forth, and he clearly was very comfortable with media, which is sort of a slightly different interview and experience than with President Yoon, having been a long-time prosecutor and a first-time politician. But Lee Jae-myung's approach to the center, I think, is going to be the big question about A, whether voters buy it, whether the centrist voters buy it, and B, whether he's going to stick to it. I think that's still sort of the lack of credibility that he has yet to build. In Korea, they've been calling it the right click by Lee Jae-myung, and so we're sort of following his right click to see exactly what he's promising, who's listening, and whether it's going to stick. And so far, it seems like even many of the conservative voters in the more conservative stalwart regions are listening to him, or at least giving him a chance. And he's at least being heard out there in the conservative part. So we'll see how it happens.
Okay, and now I want to shift to the ruling party, and that is a little bit more of a messy picture, it appears. So maybe Unjung, can you walk us through what has happened so far in the primary process and what the outstanding issues are related to the ruling party's selection of its main candidate?
Mm-hmm. So one disclaimer is still ongoing. Some process. I think there's something happening here right now in this also moment. So just be aware of that. So after like a month of a primary, there's this candidate Kim Moon-soo. He used to be a governor for the Gyeonggi province. It's the most populated area in Seoul, but and he also was a minister of labor under the Yoon administration. But Koreans really remember him best as a labor activist during the late 70s and 80s. He even worked as a factory worker to ask for the better conditions This is something really liberals also recognize, his work as a labor activist. A decade before, he was in the student movement against Park Chung-hee regime when President Park tried to run for the office for the third time. He was involved in the movement, got expelled from college 2 times. That is why it took more than like 20 years for him to get a bachelor's degree. At this moment, before Yoon declared emergency martial law, Kim Moon-soo wasn't really considered as a serious potential candidate in the conservative scene. But somehow a year ago there was a National Assembly hearing where he called former President Moon as a Kim Il-sungist, which draw a lot of backlash from the Democratic Party side. But he gained some attentions within the hardliners in the conservative scene. And after President Yoon declared the martial law, there was also another hearing at the National Assembly where DP leader requested an apology from the Yoon cabinet members to just all rise and say something about what Yoon has done. But Kim Moon-soo was the only one who refused to do that. His stance is that he's against what President Yoon has done regarding the martial law, but he's against the impeachment of President Yoon. So this kind of created a meme of what I would call this upright Moon-soo thing. So since then, he started to appear on some of the polls, and finally he secured his nomination as a Conservative Party candidate. But if you look at the polls, he still has a long way to go. Compared to Lee Jae-myung, he's 10%, 20% behind. So that is why there's a call for a unity ticket with another third-party candidate, independent candidate, former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo. So things are going wild in Seoul. We'll have to find out for the next day or a week how that unfolds. It's an ongoing situation.
Okay, and Eugene, do you have anything more to add on that?
Eun-jung really covered well, and I think Kim Moon-soo, he rose to national prominence by having this image of demonstrating loyalty to Yoon, and that really attracts a lot of voters on the right. But because of his association with this whole martial law thing, it may really alienate centrist voters who are the key to this election, and that's big challenge for him. And even within his own party, because there's a lot of calls for a unity ticket, that Kim Moon-soo may not be so effective as to face off against Lee Jae-myung, because a lot of politicians are trying to frame this election as either anti-Lee or anti-Yoon. So that's where he stands right now.
Okay. And of course, we've got this situation where the former acting president, Han Duck-soo, has left his job, jumped into politics, and it sounds like there's a debate over whether or not they can settle on a single ruling party candidate between Han and Kim Moon-soo. Michelle, how do you see that playing out? I know we don't want to make any predictions, but what do you see as the main factors that are going to be driving that final decision?
Yeah, it's really been an almost hour-to-hour development in Seoul, so it's been changing so much. Just a couple days ago, Kim Moon-soo has said he'd be willing to be on a unity ticket and that he would let Han Duck-soo sort of take the lead. But this week he has sort of changed course and said that, let me take my time, and he's sort of been backtracking on it a little bit. And the PPP party leaders seem to be sort of asking him or nudging him to make a decision and sort of pressuring him. And just a couple hours ago, Kim Moon-soo said he's going to pause his campaign out in the region, come back to Seoul so that he could talk it out with Han Duck-soo and the party leaders to try to find a solution there. I think it is, I don't want to predict, we just don't know what's going to happen, but it may be that he does sort of agree to this unified party ticket, and cede to Han Duck-soo, but it doesn't seem like he's going to go away without a fight, at least for now. You know, the goal is to really cobble together a big tent representation that would put up the strongest force against Lee Jae-myung, and Han Duck-soo can be seen as a truly centrist candidate in comparison to Lee Jae-myung, just because of Han Duck-soo's history as a longtime career bureaucrat and not a politician with a lot of baggage. And Han Duck-soo is also promising things like a constitutional amendment to try to bring some more stability and unity to the country. So I think we're just going to have to see where Kim Moon-soo lands, but there is a lot of back and forth and trading happening now. You know, so I was talking to some analysts who think that it might be resolved by the end of the week, but some people also think it could go on even past the 11th. So it's really just like sort of a daily, hourly development.
And we certainly have had a history of third-party candidates getting into presidential races and then pulling out even at the last moment. So by those standards, this might be a little bit early. Eun-jung, can you tell us a little bit more about why Han Duck-soo is even in this position as related to being potentially a presidential candidate for the ruling party? What are the factors that drove him to get in, do you think?
So, yes, I think definitely I think there's some kind of, so one point I want to mention is the Trump factor. Ever since Trump came into office, this trading negotiation has become a sort of a hot topic in Seoul. Every word Trump utters makes a headline in South Korea, and there's a growing concern in that country after this leadership sort of vacated after President Yoon declared martial law thing. There's this worry in Seoul whether this is going to go well, and looking back. Prime Minister Han's background, like he did almost everything just other than president, right? And he also has expertise in trade. He knows U.S. well. He has been a U.S. ambassador during the Lee Myung-bak administration. So I think there has been a call within the conservative camp for him to make a candidacy. And I think one defining moment was, I think it was last month when there was a call between Prime Minister Han and President Trump, where it was reportedly that Trump asked him to, are you going to run for the president, even though like Prime Minister Han didn't really answer that question at that moment. It sort of fueled the speculation, which ultimately like culminated in his declaring for the presidency.
Okay. Well, I have a number of questions I want to ask, but I also know that we're running out of time. And since you've talked about President Trump, I want to kind of just focus on that, because we've had Canadian elections and Australian elections in recent days where President Trump and the relationship with the United States has been a major factor in deciding those campaigns. How do you think that the relationship with the United States and the relationship with President Trump himself might influence the process and outcome of the South Korean campaign?
Well, first of all, I want to say there's kind of a bipartisan support for the alliance. As Michelle mentioned, Lee Jae-myung has also been very active in, if you look at his narrative, it's got much way more softer than it before, especially on the ROK-US alliance. But we don't know if Trump's gonna mention on the Korean election yet, but unlike other former US presidents, he is not really reluctant to comment on other countries' elections, what's happening there. I think if he makes a certain comment, I think it has a potential to maybe like a reshape or at least like a roil the political landscape in Seoul. But we don't know whether he's gonna comment on the Korean election or not. So we'll have to, look how that situation unfolds.
Yeah, so Trump factor will really overshadow Korea's election, I guess, also. And Eun-jung mentioned about Han Duck-soo, and Han Duck-soo is trying to really build his sort of run for the president as to he's in the best position to deal with Trump. He's really appealing about his language abilities, but I guess given Trump's transactional approach, even towards allies, I think being fluent in English, you need more than that. And what really matters is how Korea is coming up with the grand strategy to really advance its national interests. And I think there's going to be a lot of competition and debates. But since we have such a short amount of time, it's only less than a month left. So we'll still have to see how that will play out.
And Michelle, what do you think? How do you think that the Trump administration is influencing the South Korean election?
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say that so far, Trump has not been the major factor in the election debate out here. There's a general awareness that the tariffs are not targeting Korea only, that it's a global issue that dozens of countries are dealing with and negotiating with Trump, and that Korea is also, working alongside many of those other countries trying to get the best deal. And the debate around the election in Korea in the past few weeks has really just been focused on domestic stability and finding a stable path past the chaos of martial law and impeachment, and not so much issues around U.S. ROC alliance just yet. So I think it's unclear, at least today, how big of a factor it's going to be. Like Eunjung said, I think it's only going to take one Truth Social post to sort of upend all of that. But I think the compacted timeline of the election and the fact that it's going to take place before the 90-day reciprocal tariff negotiation is going to end, and the fact that so far the negotiations have been it's been pretty quiet. It's hard to know exactly what's going on. I mean, the trade negotiators can't talk about it anyway, but because the negotiations are still ongoing and the resolution is not clear yet, it's not quite cast like a super heavy cloud on the electorate sort of debate around the election so far. But again, I think all it takes is one statement, one thing that President Trump does to sort of change all of those dynamics. But especially because the business community is also very eager to find a fair and comprehensive solution to the tariffs. So I think the big issue, if any, regarding Trump and international in foreign policy in this election would be tariffs and trade policy, but it's just not at the moment the forefront of voters' minds.
Okay. So Michelle mentioned domestic stability as one of the issues, along with, I guess, the tariffs kind of hanging over the election. Are there any other issues? And of course, this is a very unfair question because events will shape campaigns, and we don't know what else is going to happen in the next 28 days. But what are the other issues, if any, that you all want to put on the table, Eunjung and Eugene?
Yeah, so you gotta think that this is an election that was not scheduled. So it's happening right after President Yoon declared the martial law. He got impeached. So forefront is gonna be there. I'm pretty sure Democratic Party will push Han Duck-soo, who was a foreign minister under the Yoon administration, and Kim Moon-soo, who's pretty much loyal to President Yoon, into corner to have pose their opinion on what do you think of President Yoon's martial law, what he has done. They're gonna push him, and I think one more, as Eugene mentioned, some of the legal challenges that Lee Jae-myung is facing. We have like 4 or 5 trials going on right now, and even among legal experts, there's a dispute that whether this should continue if Lee Jae-myung is elected as a president. The Constitution doesn't really clearly state what the state should do in those kind of situations, because it's a situation that our founding fathers have not really imagined of. So I think a lot of disputes going to be there, and add on to that, Lee Jae-myung has also 4 prior convictions. He's got some of the scandals, so I'm pretty sure the PPP will try to make a case on that one.
Yeah, as Michelle mentioned, there's also this issue of constitutional amendment, because since former Prime Minister Han has been really putting it out there, but because of his association with Yoon administration, he served as Prime Minister for the entire term of Yoon. People criticize that whether he has full legitimacy and whether it's really sincere and whether the political party will really come on board if they get into power. And when you look into the polls, voters' concern are pretty much really similar in America as well, like economy and job creation, and there's an aging problem, low birth rate, housing, education, social safety net. But as we discussed, this election is a snap election, and it has been really dominated by martial law versus democracy, and anti-Yoon versus anti-Lee, who has monumental legal challenges. So I really wonder whether we will get into those really serious and necessary political and policy debates, or whether it will just be a choice between personalities and characters of each candidate.
Well, I have some more questions about implications for foreign policy, et cetera, but I want to go ahead and open it up because I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of questions. I see one over here already with Terrence. Do we have a mic for Terrence to be able to ask his question? Right over here.
Hi, my name is Terrence Matsuo. I'm a non-resident fellow here at KIEP. Thank you for this very interesting discussion. And so my question is, given the Yoon administration's kind of controversy, what are, the expectations for the survival of some of his, key policies and initiatives like detente with Japan and U.S. Japan Korea trilateral cooperation? Thank you.
That came up in the Lee Jae-myung interview that Michelle did. So why don't I start with you, Michelle, on that question?
Sorry, so the question is, what will happen with the cooperation?
Survivability of some of the Yoon administration's initiatives on foreign policy, including Japan-Korea relations and trilateral institutionalization of the U.S.-Japan-Korea dialogue.
That's a huge question for me too, and I'm sure all of you in the room are also wondering. There's a sense, I've been talking with a lot of analysts and aides and or advisors and such, but Lee Jae-myung, comes at foreign policy. He says that his approach to foreign policy is pragmatism with the national interest in mind. And I think, I asked him, what is your pragmatic foreign policy? How is it different from, what we generally understand to be the DP foreign policy approach? And he said, you should sort of expect a generally DP foreign policy approach. But I think where Lee Jae-myung comes from it is very different in that he's not an ideologue on foreign policy. He doesn't come at it like what we are familiar with, like, for example, President Moon Jae-in. We know that North Korea reunification was his ideological approach, but Lee Jae-myung lacks that. So I think he, for better or for worse, comes at it with a sort of a more blank slate than we're used to from a DP candidate. So at the moment, I think all we have is what he says. And what he says is that he's going to continue, a stronger U.S.-ROC alliance, that he still believes in a U.S. ROC-Japan trilateral cooperation. But I think there is going to come a moment where he is going to be tested on that rhetoric, where he's going to be tested on that centrist stance that he's taking, not least because there are many people within his own party and the Democratic constituents who are not going to be going along with that more centrist approach when time comes. So I think there is going to be a moment where, for example, Korea-Japan relations, there might be some tension that comes up. And Lee Jae-myung did say during the interview that, even if I support a U.S. ROC-Japan trilateral cooperation, I do believe we have to say what we need to say when it comes to historical issues. And we can't let go of historical past and make sure that we pursue both cooperation and historical past together. And I just don't think that's, usually how it works out very well for bilateral relations. So I think we generally at the moment, we just have to sort of go by what he says. But I think he is still sort of going to be an open book when it comes to that. I mean, it's clear that he's not going to be prioritizing it the way that President Yoon had, because Lee Jae-myung believes that under Yoon, that South Korea's relationship with China deteriorated, that South Korea's relationship with Russia deteriorated, and to work on those relationships, some other things are going to have to come at the expense of those relationships. So I think we know that he's going to take a more tempered approach to, for example, trilateral cooperation than perhaps President Yoon did, but maybe it's not as dramatic of a change that you would expect from a typical DP president.
Eugene, Eunjung, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I do agree. Even though he's expressed his support for the trilateral cooperation, like will he be as proactive as what President Yoon did in Camp David or Tokyo? I'm not sure. We'll have to find out. You have to think that Lee Jae-myung, even though he was like a dominant political figure in the Korean politics for the last decade, most of the career was like as an administrator, a National Assembly member. I'm also curious, like, in the international stage, what kind of a leader he will be. We don't really know it yet. So we'll have to find out how that unfolds if he's elected as a president.
Yeah, I want to simply add that on Japan, both conservative and liberal presidents, they have tried to, do sort of like a two-track approach. So, deal with the historical issue, but we also pursue like cooperation. And I think under Yoon administration, since he really emphasized really reconciling with Japan, he sort of took a one-sided approach, and that's one of the criticisms of liberals. So we will definitely see some kind of tensions between historical issues, but given under strategic environment currently, it's really hard for Korea to actually disregard the trilateral cooperation, and I think more of a lot of pressure will come from the Trump administration, how Trump administration will approach the alliance relationship, how whether the U.S. will live up to extended deterrence commitments and all those other factors. It will more heavily influence Korea's foreign policy approach.
I think I saw Bill Brown.
Yeah, it seems like the giant.
Introduce yourself.
Was it on?
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like the giant. We say elephant in the room, but I would say panda in the room is China. Can you give us any guidance as to what the three candidates, how they look at China? I mean, it looks like the economic relationship between Korea and China is in really critical shape right now, with potential disasters happening. And I'm just wondering, how do they relate to China? Do they travel to China? Do they talk with Xi Jinping? How is that working out?
Do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So China is still South Korea's major trading partner, even though we did have something going on after the THAAD redeployment. The volume is pretty much a lot, the Yoon administration did some summit with Xi Jinping, but it was just a temporary thing during just a multilateral summit. So they're trying to have a summit this October because there's an APEC summit happening in Gyeongju. So we'll have to look forward to that one.
Any other comments on attitudes toward China of the major candidates? Did that come?
I think in case of Kim Bun-soo and Han Duck-soo, it will be pretty much same what Yoon has done. So in the middle of this great U.S.-China competition, I think those two candidates will try to align with what United States is doing. But on Lee Jae-myung, the DP, their foreign policy is like so they're saying they're gonna manage relationship with China and sort of pursue improvement in the relationship. Many people there think the Korean can sort of maintain a balance between U.S. and China, and I think that's one point where some kind of tensions might arise within the alliance because, for example, I sense a growing rhetoric here on if something like happens in Taiwan Strait, should Korea be involved or not. Lee Jae-myung has clearly stated that it's some kind of not something that we should interfere with. That was a year ago. We'll have to check out if his thoughts changed since then. But yeah, we'll have to find out how his China policy unfolds and how it will realign. It will align with what Trump administration is trying to do on countering China.
So stepping back, maybe I should ask, is it the case that with the ruling party, either candidate, you're expecting essentially continuity? Or do you think that there would be changes in the policy of a ruling party candidate as related to foreign policy?
You mean in case of Kim Moon-soo and
yeah,
An-Duck-soo?
exactly.
Well, yeah, I think it will be pretty much continuity because there's a thing I think I sense the atmosphere in Seoul that even though President Yoon upended many of the legacies he has done in the foreign policy because of the martial law thing, but what he has done on the improvement of Korea-Japan relationship and the trilateral cooperation, there's a kind of a high regard for that one. So I believe whether it's going to be Minister Han or Kim Moon-soo, they'll try to continue on that track.
One thing will be a little different will be in rhetoric, like former President Yoon really emphasized the value diplomacy, talked a lot about that, but since we have a president in the U.S. who's quite different from President Biden, we won't really see a lot of rhetoric as per se.
Okay. All right, Michelle, did you want to jump in, or can we move to another question?
We can move on.
Okay, let's see, I saw a hand in the back.
Hi, Arias Dare. I'm the Director of Communications here at KEI. This question is directed towards Michelle, but I'd be curious if other panelists also wanted to chime in. What is is there a particular fault line, a particular issue that you're hearing on the ground there in Seoul? When you speak with voters, when you speak with people in the know, politicos, is there something that maybe we don't appreciate as much from our perspective in DC that is really driving voter sentiment, that voters are really energized about, and that you think is going to play a factor in the election next month?
Well, one thing is that this is such an unconventional election. So, but the one constant has been that people have generally known that Lee Jae-myung is going to run. And so I think the benefit that Lee Jae-myung has had to sort of spread his stance, his stature and message is just so much greater than any of the PPP candidates have had a chance to. And I think he has a lead because of that. But one thing that I think is really sticking with voters, and the reason why even voters in some of the most conservative regions is giving a chance to, and hearing Lee Jae-myung out, is his message around just wanting South Koreans to live well, eat and live well. He's saying 먹사니즘, 잘사니즘, and that really means I just want policies to help you live well. And at the end of the day, it's a very simplistic message, but it goes to the voter sentiment here, which is that for the past 6 months, it has been chaotic. I mean, day-to-day life has gone on fine. I go out to restaurants and, go shopping and stuff, and things have been running fine. But every day, the headlines have been a mess, and people know that. And I still hear, for example, the other day I was at dinner, and actually every dinner I'm at nowadays, I hear at the other table people talking about politics and the election and the economy. And that's why I think the message around economic stability and this simplistic message that Lee Jae-myung is giving, which is I just want you guys to live and eat well, is actually sticking more than perhaps another election where other issues have had time to fester and enter the debate. Right now, many issues that we've may see in a traditional election just haven't been there. It's just been the economic well-being, and it's a general message that that worked in the last parliamentary election last year. It worked for DP, and he's going again with that message and sort of building on it. Now he's talking about K initiative to sort of bring in the centrist voters along to talk about a more future-looking global economy and tending to the markets as well. So he's really building out a more robust economic message than he even had the party do in 2024. And that's why I think like the economic message, and as simple as it sounds, is resonating more with voters than it perhaps would have in another election when other more controversial issues might have been in the forefront of people's minds. And I think one thing that we do need to appreciate in general is that when I talk to voters, they're just in general tired of the instability. They're tired of all of this that has gone on. Now we're on an acting president, or acting president. I'm losing track. And the you know, after the Constitutional Court ruling really laid it out fair and in a balanced way exactly what happened and the need to move forward, that sentiment has really kind of gotten a grip here in South Korea, that people just want to move forward. And I think that's important for folks over there to sort of keep in mind.
That's very interesting. I might follow up on that. What about the issue of demographics? The electorate is 3 years older. Do you think that it's a polarized electorate by age group, or do you see changes in that from 3 years ago? What is your expectation as related to how, whether or not you can predict how generational attitudes are towards each of the parties and candidates? Eugene?
In 2022 election, the last election, there was a huge gender divide, especially among young voters, like in their 20s and 30s. So about 60% of men in the 20s voted for U, and 60% of women in their 20s voted for E. And there is a really huge gender divide in Korean politics because it's only been 3 years, and a lot of politicians have done anything to really fix that problem. But we'll have to see whether that kind of cleavage will really play out in this election, because essentially this election is really framed as whether you support martial law, you know, whether you're going to tolerate that kind of undemocratic behavior and give another chance to the ruling party out of a lot of different concerns, or whether you vote Lee Jae-myung, who was against martial law but still has a lot of uncertainties and legal problems. So it's more of really, I keep repeating this frame, but it's anti-Yoon or anti-Lee, and it tends to overshadow a lot of divide in Korean politics, even the gender divide. Although they are really tend to, older generation tend to support the ruling party, conservatives, and people in the middle age group, like 40s and 50s, they tend to be more towards the liberal party. Yeah.
Okay, but it sounds like what you're basically saying is personality dominates your response.
I don't want to
these
simplify the
Okay.
situation,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the dominant factors. But also, as Michelle talked about, the economy is really on the concern of voters, and I think that's where Trump factor comes in, because Korea is a really export reliant economy, and Trump has been really expressing his disdain for industrial policies that benefited Korean companies, and he also has, Trump also has this tendency to link economic and security issues, and he may threaten again with the retreating the U.S. forces in Korea, and threatening more burden sharing and all those sort of things. So yeah, that's also in the voters' mind.
Let's go here, and then over there.
Hi, Esther Lee. You brought up the age groups. Last year, as you know, in Washington, lots of discussion around older generation to over 70 folks running for president. And now Korea is looking at between Han Duck-soo and Kim Moon-soo, two gentlemen that are over the age of 70. Has there been any discussion in that country around generational change, folks that might be maybe too old to run? Just curious, because they are significantly older than their opponent.
Yes, I do agree that there's kind of a growing concern. I mean, there's a argument on that one whether those two candidates are in the mid 70s, right? It's relatively older, but it's been quite a while that Korean politics didn't really have a new young face. We did have a really new young face for a while. So in this aspect, there's also another third-party candidate, Lee Jun-seok. I think he's mature. He just turned 40. Got just eligible to run for the president. I think it's a one variable to watch because he used to be a leader for the PPP, but ousted by the President Yoon. There are some calls in the conservative camp for the unity ticket, but because if you look at the polls, his ratings are between 5 to 10%. I think if he stays in the race, there's a high possibility that conservative candidate will lose against Lee Jae-myung, so we'll have to see on that one. But I don't think he will easily unite with those, unite with the Conservative Party, given the history thing. And if you look at his past election, it's been always his campaigns were always with unexpected reversals. So we'll have to find out how much he gets on that one.
But it does mean what you're essentially forecasting is that there could be a first merger and then a second merger, or not.
But of course, I'm not gonna make a guess. But there will be calls for a merger. But at this point, it seems Lee is against any kind of merger with It's fair enough to say that he's not gonna unite with the conservative candidate, whoever it is.
Okay. Let's see. I have one over here, and then we've got his online question. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Brian Chung, Director of Programs and Strategy at the Global America Business Institute, and my question is about energy perspectives. I'm curious about the candidates' thoughts on potential energy mixes in Korea moving forward. I'm also curious how much you think the Korean voters care and focus on energy issues. Thank you.
Who wants to take that energy issues? We've got the Czech reactor deal that sounds like it's still kind of in process, but I'm curious about what a Democratic Party perspective on that would be.
Well, I think I'll have to be very general that since President Yoon, the Conservative Party really was really pushing for sales of nuclear reactors to foreign countries, and he was really critical about Moon Jae-in's policy to sort of break away from nuclear power reliant economy. We will probably expect that from the Conservative Party, and also the different direction from the Liberal Party. But that said, given a lot of challenges, even within Korea economy and even globally, and again, there's another Trump factor because Trump has been asking East Asian allies and Taiwan to sort of come on board with this Alaska LNG project, and the East Asian countries are considering that as sort of as a wedge to leverage its position on tariff negotiations. So it's very broad, and I think there's uncertain, and that there's not much substantive debate about energy issues at the moment.
Andy?
Right, thank you. This person doesn't necessarily identify title or affiliation, but the viewer says, thank you for the great conversation. There was considerable discourse on the gender divide in the previous presidential election, and asks how much of a factor is it this time? Thank you.
Okay. The gender divide. It's really among the 20s, primarily, if I recall correctly. Do you think that will persist? And what difference does it make that Lee Jun-seok is running because he was actually the one most identified with the gender divide?
Yes, right. So Normally, the group in the 20s, they're oftentimes labeled as like a swing voter. I'm not sure whether it's going to be same this time, but the conventional wisdom is that, Lee Jun-suk tends to have a lot of support among especially the 20s and the male. It seems like 20s females seem to lean a little bit more toward the DP party. But yeah, again, this is an area of like a speculation, so I'm not really sure. But at this moment, I don't really see like a noticeable topic regarding to this generation group. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're almost.
I can add to that.
Oh, sure, Michelle, please. Yes.
Yeah, so the gender actually still has yet to be a big campaign issue, and the Lee camp seems to be trying to downplay it in the meantime. They know that it's a mad dash to election day, and something like gender could be a really divisive issue on the campaign. And so far it seems like they're sort of they're not wading into it. And it's actually become a point of frustration among many of the younger women in their 20s, the more advocates on gender issues, because they want it to become a campaign issue. But so far, the candidates just haven't broached it at all. And I don't know that it's going to be broached at all in the next few weeks, the way it had been in 22. It's just a different dynamic just because of the condensed timeline, I think. And according to the poll so far, like Eunjung said, the 20s do remain a swing vote. Something that was interesting during the post-martial law, pre-impeachment, like pre-removal of Yoon, protests of the more far-right, the PPP far-right protesters who wanted Yoon reinstated, was that some of the younger men were going to those protests. You could sort of visibly see a growing younger crowd, because that crowd tends to be a much older pro-Yoon, super conservative crowd. But we were seeing younger men go to them, and that was sort of like a newer face that we were seeing there. And then versus that with the pro-impeachment crowd, it was a much younger female dominant crowd out there. So those the divide still exists in the gender dynamics, but the campaign, I'm not anticipating it to be the same way as it was in 22, although we still have a couple weeks to go.
Okay. Thank you, that was excellent. So I have one last question for each of our panelists, and this does call for a little bit of speculation. I'd like for each of you to give us a picture of how the three main potential candidates at this point you think would interact with President Trump if they're actually elected and come to Washington. Who would like to start? Eugene?
Yeah. So I can expect all three candidates, if elected, they will try to use the art of flattery and a mixture of accolades, and we have seen that from world leaders. And they will try to, sort of come up with a lot of personal diplomacy, like flavors to it. And one interesting thing is that Lee Jae-myung has been trying to label himself as being wrongfully targeted by law enforcement officials, and I think at one point he even said that he is like sort of a Trump figure in Korea. I don't know whether that would actually work with Trump, but that kind of, constant, making connections things, we'll probably be seeing it. And Han Duck-soo, we discussed about that. He has, really extensive experience in foreign policy, and he's gonna run on that platform. But one concern for me is, and a lot of people actually share that concern, was that with his interviews with, I think it was with Financial Times, and he said that his approach to tariff negotiations is not to fight back the U.S., and we are really grateful about how U.S. provided all our security umbrella and economic umbrella. So, and voters might have a concern about whether that kind of approach can still be valid and it could still result in good outcome, but whether that actually resonates with the younger generation, because a younger generation of Koreans, while we really value, actually I'm not of the younger generation, but younger generation value alliance and really prosperity. They also think that it was really hard-won, earned by Koreans because over the past 7 years. So not that Koreans are not, grateful about U.S. alliance or anything like that, but that kind of approach, it's a little different from what people of this generation, younger generation, think. So that's, I guess, one thing that I'll watch out for.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, so I can assure you that after election is done, whoever it is, the new president will try to come to Washington as soon as possible, meet Trump, show some chemistry. It's the Korean public really don't really like much of a flattery for it, so it will be really important for him to set the tone, set the right tone. I believe diplomats will have to come up with another creative version of President Yu's American Pie, things like that, because that's really popular. That kind of way works in South Korea. So we'll have to see. So I was really interested during Lee Jae-myung's interview with foreign media outlet. He labels himself as like Trump of South Korea. We'll have to see if Trump finds that interesting. But I just want to mention, so back in Moon administration, things were a little bumpy when you look at the FTA revisions or like SMAs. Some of the folks surrounding Lee Jae-myung thinks that, we're gonna have a deal with the US, but we can give you something, but we also deserve something. So I think that might make the negotiation a little bit more harder than it seems to be. So we'll have to check that out. But yeah, it's really hard for any Korean president to have a clash or conflict with President Trump, even though he demands something that we think it's not fair. And just one point I want to mention, so it's about the Kim Mun-soo. So after Trump administration came, there's a growing argument, a growing unfavorability for this long argument of Koreans own this nuclear armament. I'm not saying that he's gonna do that, but he might have to somehow align with that argument to some extent. So maybe something more visible than a Washington Declaration and an NCG. So we'll have to see how Trump administration will tolerate on that one.
Okay, and Michelle, you get the last word.
Yeah, I agree with both of our speakers here. I know that, after speaking with some folks in the Lee Jae-myung camp, that the issue of how to approach Trump is a big one, is something that the candidate is very much thinking about every day, and it's like a big part of the foreign policy strategy. So we'll have to see exactly which route he takes. I think he could be an interesting player in terms of the chemistry because he has some similarities with Trump in some way. I mean, beyond himself, calling himself the Trump of Korea. By the way, he used to call himself the Bernie Sanders of Korea. So now he's Trump before he was Sanders. But they have some commonalities, like being politically targeted. They both survived an assassination attempt. So I think he could make some of those personality connections there. But Lee Jae-myung is definitely not going to be the kowtowing type. The whole point of the pragmatism with the national interest in mind is that he's definitely going to stick to the core of South Korean interests. And so I think he's going to be probably a spicier president than President Yoon was for sure, and perhaps even President Moon.
Okay, well, thank you for preparing us to watch the last 28 days of the election. Please join me in thanking Eugene, Eunjung, and Michelle for their speeches. Thank you so much, Michelle, for staying up late.
Thank you.